Welcome, everyone. My name is Antonio Catronio, and I'll be the moderator for our session, Strategically Approaching Digital Transformation, featuring David Woods, Precisely's SVP of Global Services, and Cam Ogden, VP of Product Management. Before we get started, we have a few housekeeping notes. This session will be recorded. The recording and resources will be available after the session concludes. If you must step away, do not pause, and know that we'd love to hear from you. If you'd like to ask a question, use the Q&A tab to communicate with the presenters. There will be time to answer questions at the end of the presentation. Use the demo, chat, and content buttons in the menu on the left and below in the session details to get in touch and learn more. And lastly, use the thumbs up button below to give us your feedback, or you can respond later to a post-event notification. With that, I'll turn it over to David and Cam to dive deep into strategically approaching digital transformation.
Terrific. Thanks, Antonio. So how do we think about digital transformation strategically? I guess the first part of that question is, how do we define digital transformation? Right? So it's kind of akin to a decade ago, where one of the first things I would hear from our customers was, hey, Dave, I'm hearing all this stuff about big data. Like, between me and you, can you explain to me what big data really is? And it's a little bit about the same right now with digital transformation. I think the best way I can describe digital transformation, because it's different for every organization, is the following. It's how do we best leverage technology and data to do two things: to change the way we operate and better interact with our customers. So while it's different for every organization, one thing remains the same, is that data is critical to the digital transformation journey, right? Whether I'm trying to have more informed, more timely, more data-driven business decisions, whether I'm trying to operate more effectively or efficiently, whether I'm trying to personalize a customer experience, the importance of data really cannot be understated as part of that journey. So today, Cam and I are going to take you guys through a few things. One, we're going to talk about how data has really changed the overall business landscape. Two, the importance of data as part of digital transformation. I think most importantly for the attendees today is some tips and tricks and some processes and methodologies that we see from really successful organizations. So whether you're just thinking about digital transformation, whether you're on the incubus or just starting your journey, or whether you feel like you're well on your way, I think some of the insights we'll talk about today, you can really take back to your own organizations and apply pretty effectively. So with that, let's talk about a couple of organizations that have really embraced digital transformation and ultimately driven a lot of value for the organizations. And I love these two examples, right? So we have Uber and we have Airbnb. So think about Uber, right? Largest taxi company in the world. They do not own a single vehicle, right? Yet, on a monthly basis, they have over 100 million subscribers, and they deliver over 15 million rides on a daily basis. And they've parlayed or leveraged that footprint, that data-driven footprint, right, to provide incremental benefits and then grow their market share, right? Uber Eats, Uber Delivery, etc. And think about Airbnb, right? Another awesome example. Just founded in 2008, right? Largest hotel company in the world, right? They own 0 properties. Yet today they have over 4 million active property hosts right now. And on an annual basis, they have over 800 million guest arrivals, right? So really, really a digital-driven business taking full advantage of digital transformation and data. Probably the most famous example would be Tesla, right? And when we talk as peers, there's a pretty healthy argument, right? Is Tesla a car company or an automobile company, or is it a technology company? Everybody knows about Tesla's autonomous vehicles and self-driving vehicles and the importance of data as part of that. What people probably don't know is Tesla really leans in heavily on data for other things as well. And I'll name a couple just to give you guys an idea of how they've really leveraged that footprint and ultimately driven really, really good profit share and outpaced their competitors, as you see on some of the visuals on the right-hand side of the screen. So one is over-air updates, right? So in the past, right, we've always had to take our vehicles, we've had to go into the service center and maintenance center to get updates to our vehicles. Tesla, through data and through their ability to analyze and leverage that data, can now push over-air updates to the driver, so you can get increased capabilities and better performance right away in real time. Second thing I love is battery optimization, right? So obviously electric cars, battery and battery life is critically important. So Uber looks at a lot of different data sets, right? They look at not only car performance, they look at driver behaviors, they look at atmospheric conditions, they look at road conditions. They analyze all that data, and then they can throttle up or throttle down on the charging and the discharging of the batteries to optimize battery life. And then think about those same data sets driving predictive maintenance as well, right? So in the past, right, we've always gone in from an A1 service, an A2 service, a B1 service, a B2 service, really been driven by two things, right? One, mileage, or two, time elapsing, right? Now, predictively, they can personalize that preventive maintenance for vehicles based on the analysis of data and taking advantage of that data as part of digital transformation. So terrific stuff for organizations that have really embraced digital transformation, embraced data as part of that, and are driving terrific financial results. That's great for them, but what does it mean to us in our organizations, right? So what's our challenge? So as we think about digital transformation, again, as I said earlier, it's different for every single organization. Every organization has a goal or an outcome or a series of goals and outcomes that they want to get out of their digital transformation. Our jobs as data professionals is to do what? Is to identify and leverage the data that delivers against that value proposition. The problem, though, is that statistics will show, and really I just say empirically working with our customers, most organizations are drowning in their data. Right? So we've had this proliferation of data sources over the past decade or so, whether it's smartphone data, social media data, Internet of Things data. We've got different data types, structured data, semi-structured data, unstructured data. We've kind of pulled all this data together, and now it's very, very difficult for data professionals to clearly identify what data actually matters is going to drive the outcomes that we expect. Now, the way we get to that point is first, let's rally around in a more detailed way what that goal and objective would be. So let me kind of take a step back and double click on that and make sure you guys understand what I mean is. So if I have an organization that says we want to digitally transform to improve my go-to-market processes or supply chain optimization or enhance consumer experience, when I say double click on that, we need to ask two important questions. The first is how are we going to measure that? Right? So what are our key performance measures, our KPIs, our PPIs, our metrics that we're going to use to measure our performance? And once I have that measurement of the performance, I can understand what the calculations are, and then data ultimately feeds those calculations. So that gives me a nice set of starting point data that I can say is going to be critical to this digital transformation journey. My other question is then, how are we going to execute against this from a process perspective? And I start to think about our processes at what I call level 5, right? Level 1 being process, level 2 being sub-process, levels 3 and 4 being your task and activity level. And then at level 5, what's the critical data that drives those tasks and activities, right? So now I've got a decomposition, if you will, of that goal and objective into the critical performance measures and the critical processes that are going to be needed to be in place to execute against that. That gives me a really good starting point for my critical data. That allows me to start to connect my data to those goals and make it stick, right? And ultimately deliver against that organizational value. So that's why I love my Abraham Lincoln quote here, right? It's all about preparation, right? It's about kind of taking that board level goal and objective around digital transformation, but as a data team member, working with the business to identify how are we going to measure it and how are we going to execute against it. And that is our path, if you will, that says what are the critical data elements that I should focus on. And that's really what makes it stick at the end of the day. And organizations that start there and follow that path tend to what we call swim in their data, not drown in that data. And that's the trick here at the end of the day. You know, I always think about digital transformation. I think about something my father said to me years ago. My father's an old school guy. He's 86 years old at this point. And he had said to me, Dave, after we got married, right? We got married, had the reception, walked around, shook everybody's hand at the tables, and he took me outside. He put my arm around me and he said to me, hey, Dave, he said, congratulations on getting married. I said, yeah, Dad, I'm pretty pumped. You know, she's a great lady. And he said, the trick, my son, is not getting married. The trick is staying married, right? And that's what the trick is of digital transformation, right? Everybody can start a digital transformation journey. The trick is, though, how do you stay transformed and how you differentiate from your competitors, right? So if that's the playbook, why do organizations fail, right? So some of the things that we talked about in the keynote I thought were great. And Diana had talked about people as a critical component to that, upskilling our people and making sure we're retaining the right people and we're arming them to be able to participate in digital transformation really, really effectively. And I think that's a critical component. The three other things that I think Cameron and I hear most often are really the following. One is lack of data management strategies. And when organizations talk to us and from a digital transformation perspective, and they talk about lack of data management strategies, they're talking really about two things, right? One, they're talking about my inability to kind of connect my different data silos. So think about data integration and data connectivity. And the other thing they're talking about is data integrity, right? So how do I ensure the quality of the data and then I can enrich that data in a way that's meaningful? And how do I manage that information? The second thing is really around how do I analyze that data? It's very, very difficult for me to analyze that data effectively. And Josh talked about this on the panel discussion yesterday as well, where he said that there is no kind of universal key field right now to kind of map that data together and allow me to be able to analyze it. And that's exacerbated by the fact that we have all these different data sets, right? Structured data, unstructured data, semi-structured data. We've got different data sources, et cetera. So the analysis of that information is extremely difficult. And the third thing that we hear a lot is, I don't have effective governance policies, procedures, and tools or capabilities, right? So it's tough for me to really understand what's the lineage of that information. And then what are the business rules that need to be in place to actually deliver against the business value I want to get from my digital transformation. Now, while there are three fairly discrete kind of challenges, and they're significant challenges, the underpin to all that stuff that Cam and I talk about a lot is context, right? Is that in the past, when everybody was trying to homogenize all these disparate data sets into these big data lakes, all of our capabilities from a data perspective were very, very control based, right? So it was really the 7 C's of data quality. Is it consistent? Is it complete? Is it accurate? Is it timely, et cetera? The problem with that is it wasn't tied to context. And context is really what drives business decisions, and it drives transformation, right? So today for digital transformation, the paradigm, what I want people to think about is control is still important. It's kind of a means to an end, but we need to, on top of control, have context for that information. The combination of control and context, that's the differentiator, right? So I talked a little bit about Tesla before, I talked about Uber, et cetera. But Tesla takes the data, they have control over the data so they can trust it, but they put it in context to drive better behaviors and better outcomes for their consumers. That's how we differentiate, right? Now, the good news for everybody here attending today is the data integrity suite, and really our services and our methodology that complements that, allows customers to do both. Right. So before I kind of get off of context, I want to create a visual that I love. And this is an old visual, but this illustrates some really important points, right? One, let's just talk about it, right? So data, actual data here tells me that the divorce rate in Maine has a direct correlation to the per capita consumption of margin, right? So funny, right? But this is a good example and illustration of the fact that I can give my business users data, and I can give them tools to visualize that data. And that data can be correct, because the data points that I'm showing year by year, consumption by consumption, and divorce rate by divorce rate, they're accurate. I can tell you they're accurate. But the context for that is inappropriate. And here's the difference, guys, right? Is that in the past, we had this mentality of, if we build it, they will come. That doesn't work anymore. The mentality has to be, if we build it, they will come, they will use it, they will like it, and they will stay. And context drives that. Because people will come, they'll laugh at this, they'll never come back, right? We need to present that information in a way that's going to stick, make them stay, make them love the experience, and then we can democratize data to the business users. So we've talked about data democratization for a while, and this gets into the people aspect, which Cam and I are going to get into next. But data democratization hasn't taken off like all the analysts thought that it would. It's still in kind of the low 30%. And the reason it hasn't taken off is because we're not democratizing with context. And that's what I think some of the things you guys have seen so far, and you'll see later today around the data integrity suite, provides terrific context for the information that really allows us to differentiate. So with that, let's kind of talk about how we get this done, right? So we talked about connecting the data to business needs and being a critical step. Cam's going to walk you guys through how we do that more discreetly, and hopefully some insights you can take home to your own organizations and get things either back on track or start on the right path that's going to create some ultimate success for you. So Cam?
Great. Thanks, Dave. So if our company is going through a digital transformation, like Dave said, it's going to be a key part of the overall company strategy, really from the C-suite on down. But as data professionals, I think that we need to acknowledge that the goal is not digital transformation. So just like Dave's story, it's not about getting married, but it's really about, the journey. It's not about the start, it's what the transformation actually delivers at the end of that journey. So every business has a unique set of goals that they expect digital transformation to deliver. As an example, one of those goals could be improving the speed to market of new products and services, getting products or services to the market more quickly, to take a competitive advantage on recency and have a pole position for that new product or category. Or we can have an initiative on how we would support ESG initiatives, and that might help to improve our overall corporate responsibility and posture for our customers, our business partners, and our stakeholders. Or another example that you see here on the slide is providing greater product transparency to our customers, something that I think all of our customers want, particularly for our supply chain driven organizations, wanting to see where the product is sourced from, where the ingredients come from, making sure that it's as local as possible, and other drivers that would tie into that initiative. So what we call these are the highly visible strategic wants. It's really the reason why our execs approve the budgets, and our companies do the work to become more agile and leaner and ultimately data-driven at the end of the day. So what we need to do is to connect these goals and metrics to the enabling data capabilities that you see underneath here. And these are the things that, for our operational leaders and our tactical leaders, our folks that are in the trenches with hands on keyboards, working with the data every day, these are the things that are obvious to us: organization, processes, and tools. But we need to make sure that the program is squarely relevant to the digital transformation outcomes that the execs and that the strategic leaders and the organizations are signing up for. So we think about it from the bottom up. It's not always clear to the strategic level why some of these enabling data capabilities are necessary. Some of you might have had this experience if you've ever had to explain the value of a new hire or a tool several times and justify the value or the ROI several times to the same group or the same person. This is likely the reason for the pushback. I'm not saying that there shouldn't be justification on a product or a new resource, but what I am saying is that we need to understand that that connection isn't being made to the strategic goal, or the ROI isn't being as perceived as high enough to get the sign off for that resource or for the tool. So another way to think about it is in terms of, instead of asking for a new team of data stewards to help with enforcing governance policies, we might talk about how our new product data steward will improve our speed to market by a few percentage points. Or similarly, we can think about how we can propose our SaaS analytics tools in our framework to improve ESG reporting, or how having a broader set of data enrichment assets can help us be more transparent about the location or the source or point of origin of our products. So the bottom line is that we need to think about the value drivers that digital transformation will deliver, and then connect it to our people and our process and the tools in our platform to ultimately enable that initiative. We can use this lens to help us find the most important data in our company. So as we go to the next slide, that would really be our critical data. And that's what we want to be able to talk about next. So if we look at the bottom of this pyramid, think about all the data that our company owns and stores and has on hand. And then only about 40% of that subset of the overall data that we own is really used to run the business and our day-to-day operations. So less than half of it is really relevant from a business operational perspective. And then 10% of that is used for the decisions and KPIs and analytics that Dave talked about in our lead-in. And 5% of that is really what we would call the critical data, the data that we would use to drive the initiatives and the objectives that our digital transformation goals were really founded against when the charter was initiated. So I think that the easy misstep here is to start at the bottom of this pyramid and to try and tackle all the data that we have, meaning try to find all the data that we have, clean it all, govern it all. And it sounds obvious, but that's a mistake that we see get made far too often, is just trying to focus on too much. So instead, what we see is top performing companies start by getting clarity on what is the critical data at each level. And then only when they get clarity on that critical data, they can scale out from there. When they do scale, they're able to scale out at a fairly rapid pace. The top performers will focus on establishing a decision tree for what makes that data element critical. And what that decision tree becomes is somewhat of a contract or an agreement that takes the discussion out of the subjective and into the objective, where we can quantify what makes a critical data element. And from there, all decisions can be made around how to standardize the data, use it, share it, and so on within the context of our broader transformation objective. And Dave also talked about the role of context. The critical data puts into context the data capabilities that are essential in the organization to ensure that the information is high quality and it's ready for business use. So we'll go down another layer and to talk more specifically about what is this critical data. And on the next slide, this is where our understanding of our end objective that we talked about in the previous slide and this critical data come back into the picture and bring these concepts overall together. So if you think about this from the top down, if we're working towards improved speed to market, our critical data are active products and orders and might be information around customer delivery data. If we're focusing on e-commerce or more of an omni-channel experience, then we're looking at when items are added or ordered or deleted from our online interactions. And the takeaway here is that having this connectivity and clarity then makes everything else easier. We can allocate resources where they're needed the most. We can improve our customer experience. We can be more effective at managing risks. And those are really the outcomes that every company expects, regardless of industry, regardless of category. But those are ultimately the outcomes that we're driving towards when we embark on digital transformation. So Dave, how about we talk about some specific customer examples that we've worked with to shed some more light on this topic?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, Cam, I love this framework, and I love the impact of the framework. And let's talk about like Mars Wrigley is a really good example, who you and I both interacted with a lot over the last couple of years. And Mars Wrigley went through a digital transformation with some very specific goals and outcomes. So at a top line level, just to name a few, right, go-to-market optimization was really intended to drive more revenue from their innovation, net new products to the world, and then improve their time to market so they could differentiate, get products to market a lot quicker and a lot sooner, and then reduce their overall effort, right? So, kind of the churn it took to ultimately get products to market. And what the framework allows them to do is at a North Star level, interact with the personas that are at an executive level, and then deep dive down into the processes and the performance measures that are important to your functional VPs and functional owners. So for go-to-market transformation, right, that's everything from R&D and new product development through demand planning, supply planning, through your sourcing activities and procurement activities, manufacturing, and ultimately your logistics, pick, pack, ship, and delivery type activities, with kind of sales and marketing overarching through all that type stuff. And then ultimately down to the data professionals and what we're doing from a data perspective to enable that transformation. But the great thing from a framework perspective is, and Cam, you and I know this well, a lot of people say, well, I have a data catalog, right? So I've got all my data captured. Well, that's kind of the marriage, that's the wedding ceremony, right? The marriage is actually the continuum of everything up there. So how do I connect that data to those processes, to those performance measures, and ultimately up to the goals? And it allows us to work kind of top down, right? So I can go from those executives, I can work my way down to the critical processes, critical data. I can talk to the process owners or have accountability for a process or a segment like a supply chain VP, talk about the things that matter to them, show there's a correlation to the overarching organizational goals and down to the data. And then importantly, at a data level now, I can make sure that things we're doing from a data perspective are complementing and not contradicting things that other initiatives, other KPIs are relying on, and all driving towards a North Star. So a critical component, as we said, of any digital transformation. And quite frankly, I think, Cam, you'd agree, almost any data program in general, right? So let's talk about this personas a little bit more and get into people and process. So like any transformation, right? Like, tried and true, right? Delivering any capability comes down to three things, right? People, process, and technology. And let's focus now on the people and the process side of this first. So one thing that's a little bit different about data and people, right? And really particularly from a data transformation perspective is that the way people interact with data is different than they interact sometimes with other processes, right? So we have what we call very dedicated users for data, people that create and maintain data on a daily basis or a very, very repetitive basis. We have what I call frequent users of data that really consume that data on a periodic basis as part of their business processes or analytics, et cetera. And then you have infrequent users that really rely on that data. So you've got this continuum of users that interact with data in different ways, which makes it a bit of a different challenge than we're used to. But you can see, as part of the overall data transformation journey right now, people at the heart of a lot of this, right? Business collaboration, user experience, self-service, process intelligence, et cetera. So Cam, I'm going to turn it back to you. And why don't we just deep dive a little bit on some of those personas and why people are important and what that journey really looks like from a people point of view.
Yeah, people are a crucial component to digital transformation, but I think what we find is that it tends to be the most overlooked. There tends to be a hyper focus on certainly the technology and then the process. But digital transformation, it's kind of like building a house. We can have access to all the raw materials or the data that's available to us, but like building a house, we can have all the wood, we can have all the nails, we can have all the brick and mortar. We can have access to the latest construction tools and technologies, but really at the end of the day, you need a team of skilled builders to turn that blueprint into a reality, a mason, a plumber, an electrician, and, really other specialists to get the job done. But, beyond the specialized skills, the culture needs to transform too. And this tends to be, the big shift or stumbling block that, organizations will underestimate. There are a couple of key components on the cultural shift. Number one, it's being able to adopt a data product mindset. We heard Dan talk about this morning around how organizations need to think about how they can ship and deliver data products where business domains and other functions can produce products that can be shared and accessed and used by other teams across the organization. An example of this that we've seen is how, a lot of engineering organizations that go through their R&D activities are using more marketing analytics and customer engagement scores, NPS scores, net promoter scores, to think about how they prioritize and launch new products. The second area around a cultural shift could be around needing to become more data-driven. And to become more data-driven, there needs to be the levity to know that there can be experimentation without the fear of failure or penalty. So experimentation needs to come with taking risks and testing new ideas rather than waiting to make sure that everything is perfect and in its right place, to make sure that we have all the data to make a perfect decision, even though we would take that, but that comes more through iteration as opposed to hitting the center of the bullseye the first time every time. And then the third big shift is around collaboration. And this is really key for executive management and business level leaders. This comes with encouraging openness and transparency from the rank and file to make sure that they're bringing their ideas to the table, their stumbling blocks. And executive line management needs to come from a place of service where they need to understand what is the mission of what good looks like and how can they remove blockers for the folks in the trenches that are doing the heavy lifting day to day. But when the team of builders aren't aligned and when these cultural changes aren't all in place or supported, then the program can flounder. And so on our next slide, we're going to talk about a typical story that maybe some of you have seen happen often in your own organizations, but I think also happens all too often in a transformation event. And what you're looking at here is a transformation timeline that's gone a bit awry. And it goes something like this. Leadership will form a data team that's based off of an inciting event or a digital transformation trigger. These could be any of the objectives that we talked about earlier. And this data team is really given the capital and the authority to organize a set of skilled builders that are responsible for architecture and governance and data engineering. And they're empowered to take the company to the next frontier. And that data team is pretty savvy. So they engage the business for requirements and rules and input on what data is critical and what it should look like. And the business goes along with it. They want to help. But if they don't feel like that they have ownership in the transformation, then they're really left wondering, well, how does this help my job? And they almost see the digital transformation as a moonlighting activity as opposed to being really mission critical to their daily jobs. And they come away asking, well, why should I care? So instead, what they'll notice is that there's this new team, this new data team that can help them solve all their very specific data problems. But those data problems aren't necessarily relevant to the overall digital transformation goal. So eventually, this business, the business stakeholders lose interest in the transformation initiative. They don't see progress. They don't see how it ultimately is going to help them accomplish their goals. And then they stop coming to the meetings and supporting the initiative. And ultimately, leadership asks, well, where's the ROI? So the takeaway is why does this happen? It really happens for three reasons. Number one, it happens when the data team is empowered, but doesn't have a clear framework for how to measure success for the transformation initiative. Making sure that we can establish clear measurements for success with leadership that capitalize the event in the first place. Number two, this happens when the goals aren't clearly understood by all stakeholders, including technical and non-technical contributors. And number three, it happens when it's not clear to those contributors what the program means to the role and responsibility. So the way out of this is really to encourage collaboration and accountability with operating models. And that's what we're going to talk about on our next slide. And operating models are essentially a plan to get stakeholders to collaborate together to deliver a shared result. It's a great tool. It's something that we see all the top performers that go through a transformation event utilize. And an example of an operating model could be a data operations process or a data ops process to turn raw data into insights and the way that the business wants to use it for self-service. This gets back to the data velocity concept that Dan Passett talked about earlier this morning in the keynote. or it could be a governance process to identify and review or certify data, or it could be a process to onboard or validate streaming data. Essentially, these processes make up an operating model playbook that ensures collaboration and accountability across all stakeholders. So Dave, why don't we talk about why this makes a difference and why it matters in the big picture with many of the customer organizations that we're working with?
Yeah, and Kim, I mean, this is key, right? So, you and I are both big fans of Simon Sinek, right? And without this type stuff, right, people will understand kind of what they need to do and how they need to do it, but the why they need to do it, the operating models really drive home, right? So, we're both big plans, what we call play the tape forward, right? And what we find is that people can execute in their roles as part of a digital transformation as they interact with data much more effectively if they can see the full picture. If they understand, based on what I'm doing today, how's that data going to be consumed, used, or relied on to either improve business processes, provide better analytics, or inform better business decisions. So, while it's a little bit of work to put these things together, having that playbook that complements the RACI and the roles and the project charter is really what I would say one of the 4 pillars of really, really successful programs that almost every one of them has. So great topic there. So now we've talked about kind of the three-legged stool, right? People, process, and technology. So we've talked about people, we talked about process. Let's talk about technology as an accelerator next. So if we look at technology as an accelerator, as part of the digital transformations, I'm going to start with some key concepts as it relates to how we should pace ourselves, right? So if you look at kind of any maturity curve that any of the analysts provide, there's generally a 4 or 5 step maturity curve process. And I'm going to start with a 4-step model here. So if your organization, and when I say organization, I don't necessarily mean holistically, maybe it's just a function or it's a subset or a line of business within your organization that's part of your digital transformation journey. If they're what we call tribal, right? So there's a lack of data literacy, which Diana talked about a lot yesterday during the panel discussion. If there's scattered knowledge of information, where does it come from, what's the lineage, et cetera, and you're constantly in firefighting mode, your technology footprint really should be focused on data remediation tools, right? So how do I clean the data, identify the important data, and get it back in a place that we can execute our business processes and execute our analytics with some efficacy? If we're kind of at that point, again, maybe not holistically, but even within some functions or lines of businesses, et cetera, then I want to have tools in place that allow me to extend that value proposition, be more proactive, right? So you've heard terms around like data observability here over the last day and a half, and you've looked at some more advanced uses of data quality tools, and you looked at data lineage type capabilities within some governance tools, et cetera. Like organizations that are at that stage and they want to be more proactive, that's where these tools come into play, right? And then finally, if you're kind of at that point, you're really going to start to differentiate and really leverage data as an asset, that's where you need tools that are really looking at enhanced value creation, right? Now, the good news is, at least from our technology suite, is that our tools really facilitate that entire continuum, right? So it's really taking advantage of capabilities within that continuum that allow you to kind of get to the next level or step change to the next level when you're ready to organizationally, or parts of your organization are going to be able to get to. But really, technology in general can really be a nice pull to bring the rest of the organization up as part of these journeys. So Cam, why don't we double click on that a little bit when we talk about the overall data delivery lifecycle here?
Sure. Almost every transformation use case is built by turning raw data into something that's trustworthy and actionable for our business stakeholders to use. But how? What are the steps? So tools can help us with automating the steps in something that we call the data delivery cycle. These are the steps that really connect the raw data assets into trustworthy data products that the business can use. So the first step is we just have to be aware of the data that exists. And these are where discovery capabilities that can discover the data assets, harvest the metadata, make sure that we're providing visibility and understanding into the provenance of data through data lineage and traceability are really important. The second step is being able to understand the data and really understand it in business terms. It's no longer good enough to just have a catalog that contains technical information. We have to be able to connect the dots to not only what is this data in business terminology, but how is it used by the business and how can it drive value for the organization? And then we can make sure that of a subset of that, again, our critical data, we would want to clean either by transformation or data prep or data processing to ensure that the data is standardized and in the right format. The best in class companies that do this also use third-party data for their data enrichment step to add context to the data that they already own. Again, Dave talked a lot about context at the top of the presentation, and that is really what turns data itself from being a truth into data that is true and also important for our business. And then we can make sure that we're securing the data by setting policies from a data governance perspective and monitoring it and observing it, as David talked about, to make sure that we're able to keep it clean. So when the data does change, and we all know that it will change, our teams can immediately know about it and get in front of it before it impacts the business. So this can certainly increase the velocity of our transformation initiative and ultimately the velocity in being able to get from time to insight from hours into minutes and then eventually down into seconds, which we heard about a lot in the keynote this morning. And the ways to automate this, I'll just hit on a couple of points here. The ways on how you can bring these steps together are provide components that are more integrated so that each step logically leads to the next. The most common example here is integration with APIs, but you can also use services that are part of a common foundation. If you think about how your users are interacting with these steps, having a consistent user experience with a single UI can also help across the lifecycle. And we also need to make sure that these tools are sharing metadata with each other. Shared metadata across each of these steps, from discovery all the way through monitoring and observability, that's going to improve our consistency, but also lays the groundwork for artificial intelligence and recommendations and machine learning, which will help us save manual steps in the process. So nailing down all these steps and looking for ways on how we can automate the gaps between them will really increase the speed of delivery and ultimately radically improve the ROI for our transformation initiative overall. So with that, Dave, I'll turn it back to you to recap everything that we've shared today before we open it up to questions.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Cam. Good stuff there. Yeah, so hopefully we've shared some really good insights with the team. We've talked about some success journeys for organizations that have really taken advantage of digital transformation, and hopefully you can apply some of those things back to your own organization, your own journeys. We'll recap with kind of 6 things here that I think ultimately kind of cement some of the talk track that we brought to you guys today. One is, what business value do we want to drive, right? So we talked about getting really specific about those business goals and decomposing those business goals into really kind of how we're going to measure that. So performance measures, and then the key processes, ultimately at the task and activity level, they're going to help drive that. That'll get you a lot further and make sure that you're on the right journey and that journey is going to stick. 2, we talked about what data is critical to achieve those goals. So we talked about kind of Cam's pyramid there. So look at things that not only are what we call sometimes low-hanging fruit, but things that are data that we have access to or that we control, that are critical for business process execution, critical for our performance measures, and ultimately are the subset of data that drives our key business decisions and more informed data-driven decisions. If we get that right and we build the program that way, it's pretty easy to elbows out to the other data sets. And then we talked a lot about the frameworks for success, right? So a framework inclusive of people, process, and technology. So frameworks that extend, if you will, above the data catalog level, but up to the business process level and ultimately to the goal and objective level, so we can connect the dots and be able to go top down, middle out, and then bottom up as we look at these initiatives and the data that drives that. Other things that we talked about here was, how do we collaborate effectively, right? So collaboration and really getting these personas engaged, there's really 2 parts of that. One is making sure that we have clear insight to the North Star and the goals we're trying to achieve and what my role is. But importantly, how do we operationalize that as part of operating models? And this is where the operating models are really a key component of success. And I would say, importantly, sustained success, right? A lot of people have success without operating models early on. That tends to go away pretty quickly. So we can do well in the first quarter of the game, right? But we really need to have an operating model in place to make sure that we're going to play well through the second, third, and fourth quarters and ultimately win the game. And then how do we ensure value delivery? This is where we have that clear alignment, right? So if we can connect the data to those business value drivers and we have performance measures that are commensurate with that, then we can start to quantify those investments, our before and after, and the quantification of the value that the changes in the way we're operating are delivering ultimately value to our customers, that are driving top line and reducing some operational expenses. And then finally, we talk about automation and scale, right? So this is where technology really comes into play, right? And I would say that, in particularly the last slide that Cam kind of talked about, there's a lot of components to a digital transformation recipe, if you will. And that recipe and that meal varies from person to person and organization to organization, right? So for your digital transformation journey, you may need 3 cups of enrichment, 1 cup data quality, 1 cup data governance, 1 cup data integration. Another digital transformation journey may require 3 cups data governance, 1 cup data integration, 4 cups data quality, right? the key for automation and scale is how do you leverage those things together as part of interoperable platforms? And we stay kind of from a technology perspective, one step ahead of the maturity level so we can pull the organization. And when they're ready to get there, we're ready to execute against that. So anyway, we really enjoyed the time today and love sharing the digital transformation story. I know Cam and I both like that. We get a lot out of that. And Antonio, I think if there's any questions from the audience, we'd be happy to spend the next couple of minutes answering those.
No, thanks, David. Thanks, Cam. This is an incredibly valuable conversation. So as David said, at this time, we'll open up for questions. If you have not entered your questions in the Q&A, please do that now. Okay. We have one from, okay, let's go ahead and move this forward. All right, high performance Cassandra was designed specifically from the ground up to take full advantage of multi-processor, multi-core machines and to run across many dozens of machines housed in multiple data centers. It scales consistently and seamlessly to hundreds of terabytes. I'm not sure if that's exactly a question or if it was a comment on something that you heard in the presentation. I do have another question here. What role do emerging technologies like AI and ML play in enterprise digital transformation strategies?
Yeah, sure. So I can take that one, Antonio and Dave, if that's good. So I think, when you think about AI, whether it's IoT, blockchain, machine learning, all are great tools, but they are tools. And I think it's pretty clear that some or most of them are going to be essential in the next frontier. We can already see the advances with AI and with just advent of ChatGPT and Google Bard and Midjourney and a number of other capabilities just in the last 6 months, and that's only going to exponentially increase. The adoption of these tools or technology first has to align with the organization's overall digital transformation strategy. So if you think back to the concept on, what are the organizational value drivers that we expect to have delivered through transformation itself? And then what are the underlying enabling capabilities? AI, ML, IoT, that comes into play when you think about the underlying capabilities. And then we can also think about the people and process implications from there. So a couple of thoughts. I think number one, we need to make sure if we are going to leverage something like AI, ML, we're building skilled teams that encompass data scientists, AI specialists, and other developers that are trained and can partner with other business partners and other capabilities that we are building and delivering internally. Number two, in order to leverage it, high quality data is still going to be incredibly important. Anyone that understands how AI models are built, certainly the ability to label data and make sure that it is labeled correctly and that it's high quality, you avoid the garbage in, garbage out paradigm, is critically important for these models to run effectively, which can shorten the curve for the transformation journey. And then number three, we have to develop a scalable and reliable infrastructure. So this means increased demands on data processing, storage. Cloud computing certainly is, a key part of this transformation that can provide scalability and flexibility and help with reducing infrastructure costs. So those are just a couple of different ways. It's a fairly broad question, but essentially we need to think about how they are tools at the end of the day and how those tools can support our enabling data capabilities that align with our value drivers. So I hope that helps.
Awesome. I know we have one other question, and David will need to be pretty quick on this. We're coming to the close. How can organizations ensure they stay agile and adaptable in the face of rapid technological change?
Yeah, great question. So to be quick, this is where the framework and the data decision tree becomes critically important, right? Because data that's really, really important today may not be important to an organization 2 years from now, 2 months from now, 5 years from now. And data that was not important today may be critically important 6 months from now, right? So just think about a macro level environment changes. Data that was important from a pandemic perspective, right, was not captured, was not governed, was not of high quality or even considered. As the pandemic hit and after the pandemic, now that's critical data. ESG is another really good example of that. Any macro level thing. So as business needs and consumer needs change and pivot, it's really important that we follow that decision tree process to dictate what data is critical and what data is important, rather than trying to identify discrete data elements and capabilities around them, right? Because I guarantee, Antonio, if I asked you what are the most 5 critical data elements for you today, and I ask you that same question 6 months from now, you're going to give me 4 of the 5 will probably be different, right? And that's the thing I would say most importantly allows us to be agile and flexible.
Awesome. Thank you all again for joining today's session, and thank you, David and Cam, for the incredible presentation. If you'd like to request a demo or live trial, schedule a conversation with Precisely experts, or dive into more content on today's topic, please use the demo, chat, and content buttons in the menu on the left and below in the session details to get in touch and learn more. And lastly, use the thumbs up button below to give us your feedback, or you can respond later to the post-event notification. Thanks again, and enjoy the upcoming sessions on customer experience and master data management.